ग्लोबल स्किल डेवलपमेंट मिशन में आपका स्वागत है।
All right, we have the fundamentals under control, hopefully. Now what I want to do is I want to talk about resizing your images. I want to talk about cropping your images, Photoshop's canvas, a few other things in here as well. Let's get started here in this exercise with resizing your images, making them bigger and making them smaller. Now, before we really jump into this topic, what I really want to stress here is that you don't resize your original images. Hang on to your originals. Back them up. We want to resize copies of your images because, you know, this has happened to me in the past. I'm guilty of this, where I take the original and I shrink it way, way down, and then I save it, and then I close it so I can't undo. And then maybe the next day or a week later on, I go, oh, geez, where's the original? I can't find it. Oh, wait, I resized the original. I can't go back to the original dimensions because I overwrote the original file. So lesson learned, right? So let's get started with an image here. I'm going to go and double click on my seemingly useless gray background here inside Photoshop. And go ahead and grab a file here. You can even use one of your own. That is perfectly fine. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll grab gogetterray.psd and I'll pop this guy open. There we go. Now, Photoshop has a dialog box dedicated to sizing and scaling your images. Let's go and take a look at him. He's found underneath the image menu. As a matter of fact, image and then down to image size. There's your keyboard shortcut if you're interested. Command-Option-I on the Mac side, Control-Alt-I on the Windows side. And this is the image size dialog box revamped in this latest version of Photoshop. So here's the grand tour of the image size dialog box. On the left-hand side here, we have this little preview window here, which I don't even really bother using. You can zoom out and zoom in on your image if you want. I don't really know why, because I have my original image sitting there in the background, so I don't even really pay attention to this guy. More importantly, all the action is happening over on the right-hand side of the dialog box, right over here. So there's the file size for my image, my current image that I'm working on, 7.5 megs. And then the next item that I have down is the dimensions, okay? And what I'm seeing here are the dimensions of the file or the image in pixels. You can see px there, so 2000 pixels by 1319 pixels. What I can do, though, is I can drop down this dimensions menu and I can change the unit of measurements. I could say, all right, tell me what the image is in the image's dimensions, I should say, in inches. So let's say 6.5 by about 4.3, 4.4, something like that. Okay. Or of course, if I go percent, then we're going to get 100%. The image hasn't been resized yet, so it's at 100% width and 100% height, and so on and so on. You could go centimeters, you could go millimeters, whatever works for you. Okay. So the idea here being that if you're working in the world of print design, you will typically use inches. If you're working in the world of web design, you will oftentimes use pixels, okay? Myself personally, I flip-flop back and forth between those two worlds, print design and web design, so all depending on the project, that determines the unit of measurement that I'm going to use, okay? Now, this Fit To drop-down menu, I never use in a million years, but I'm obligated to show it to you here. So you can choose different dimensions here, presets, if you will. You can create your own if you want. You can load them in. You can save them out, all that kind of stuff. But I typically don't bother with this stuff. Okay, more typically what I'll do is I'll come down to width and height. Now, notice that the width and height are linked together. This means if I change one, the other is going to change automatically. So, for instance, if I take my width, I go, all right, it's about 6.5 inches. Let's say, for instance, I want to size this image down to just 5 inches. I'm going to type in 5 here, and the height automatically adjusts for me. Okay, that's because this icon here is activated. So we're constraining what's referred to as the aspect ratio, the width and the height, right? If we unlink these guys, unlink the width and height, now I can change the width and the height independently of one another. And you wind up getting what I refer to as the Carnival Funhouse mirrors. You get the distortion happening here. You know, those Carnival Funhouse mirrors that make you appear tall and skinny or short and wide, you know, something like this, right? So you start distorting your image, which I don't like personally. I really want to make sure that I constrain my proportions. So again, if one of the values changes, the other value is going to change as well. Okay? And of course, once again, I can go and change my unit of measurements: inches, centimeters, millimeters, pixels. Okay? So here's perhaps a more real-world example for you. I come in here, I'm switching my unit of measurement to pixels because I'm working in a web project. I'm building a web layout, let's say, for instance. And in my web layout, in my code, maybe in Dreamweaver or maybe in some other application, maybe I'm using WordPress, who knows, I know that the area that I've left for my image is exactly 500 pixels in width, so I would type in 500 like so. The unit of measurement, of course, is already set. Aspect ratio is locked, so the height automatically changes, and that's it. I can go ahead and click on OK and then save this guy out in a web-friendly file format. That's kind of the long and short of it. Okay? However, there are some additional options that we have inside this dialog box which start to get a little bit technical, a little bit on the complicated side. We have the resolution. Okay, now, a lot of people, even professionals, would come into this dialog box and go, oh, you've got a 300 dpi image. Have you ever heard of that before, DPI? Oh, you've got a 300 dpi image or a 200 dpi image. As a matter of fact, that's not correct because we're not working in DPI. DPI, by the way, stands for dots per inch. We're actually working in something called pixels per inch, okay? And this is where it gets a little bit confusing and, truth be told, a little bit above and beyond the scope of this course. The short and sweet is that pixels per inch is used on screen by software. Dots per inch is used in the world of print, typically in offset printing. Okay? So all this number means at this point is if I were to print this file on my desktop printer or, on a commercial printer, then 300 pixels would be printed for every inch of paper. That's all that means. Okay, so I could come in here and I could change this value if I wanted to. I could knock it down to 100, or I could crank it up to maybe 600, something like this. Okay, but here's the interesting thing, is in the world of print, resolution matters, but in the world of web design, resolution does not matter. Okay, so a 600 pixel per inch image is just fine in the world of web design, just as, if you've ever done any web design, you might be familiar with 72 pixels per inch. Okay, what really matters in terms of the world of web design is the pixel width and height. That's what really matters here. So again, back to 500, something like this. I could knock it down to 72. That would be fine. I could leave it at 300. It doesn't really matter. So long as the width and height are set correctly. That's really what matters. And as a matter of fact, this is such an intricate, kind of complicated subject that I think I'm going to have to make a dedicated course just to talk about resolution and resampling, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, and understanding DPI, PPI, pixels per inch, and there's a third one, LPI, which is lines per inch, understanding all this stuff and understanding how it all works. But again, it's all sort of beyond the scope of this course. I mentioned resampling. That's this guy here. Essentially, the short and sweet here is what resampling is how we want Photoshop to handle the pixels inside the image when we go to resize. So try to use the suggestions here in the brackets. Enlargement, if I'm making an image larger, or if I'm reducing the size of an image, or if I want to try and maintain my hard edges, and so on. Okay? So that's kind of the long and short of the image size dialog box. I come in here, I set the unit of measurement that I'm going to be working in, again, either inches or pixels, typically. Then I'd hammer in my width and height. The other thing that I want to mention is oftentimes you can size an image smaller, you can scale it smaller without having any impact on the quality, but cranking it higher, cranking it larger in terms of size will result in a reduction of quality. So we usually want to scale down rather than scaling up. Okay? I come in here, I set up my dimensions. I would recommend, if you're brand new to Photoshop, leaving resample set to automatic. Go ahead and click on OK. That's all there is to it. Okay? So that's kind of the run-through of your image size dialog box. I hope all of that makes sense for you. Let me zoom in on this guy. There's 100% for this guy. And again, don't forget Command-Option-I or Control-Alt-I on your keyboard to get into the image size dialog box. All right, with sizing and scaling images now out of the way, let's go and take a look at cropping your images.